So, as you may have surmised from the opening treatment, and especially if you read the email that went out last night, today we're going to go boldly where the mind can't go, where the intellect can't go. We're going to step beyond the physical into the metaphysical. We're going to step beyond the metaphysical into the mystical. We're going to step into that which can only be known by experience. Now, the intellect can tell us that the experience is there, but until we have the experience, we will not know. We will not know. So I'm going to toss out a couple of ideas, some metaphors, some similes, some things to try to put the intangible into some sort of a parable, something that we can relate to, a little story that we can relate to. But we have to remember that the story is not the thing, right? The Belgian artist that has the famous painting, I think it's called The Treachery of Illusion, or The Treachery of Illustrations, Treachery of Illusion, I think. And it's an oil painting of a tobacco pipe, the kind of curved pipe that Sherlock Holmes had in the movies. And in French it says below it, "This is not a pipe. This is not a pipe." And yet you look at it, and it's a pipe. It has a stem, it has a little bit that you can chomp down on, it has a tobacco bowl. There's, if I recall it correctly, there's actually tobacco lit in the pipe, and there's smoking coming out of it. So you look at the picture and you say, well, if it's not a pipe, what is it? And of course it's an illusion. It is a picture of a pipe. It is an artist's rendering of a pipe, but it is not a pipe itself. It is only something that reminds us of a pipe. It conjures up a memory of a pipe, an image of a pipe. And what we're experiencing is not what's on the canvas. We're experiencing our perception. We're experiencing our memory. We're experiencing everything that we know about pipes. Perhaps as children growing up, our father or grandfather smoked a pipe, and immediately whatever the aroma of that particular tobacco comes back to us, and we can smell that, and we are no longer looking at the canvas. We are now fully engaged in something that is taking place only in thought. And then we have to kind of come back a little bit from that and say, well, the words that we use, the names that we give to things, they are not the thing. They are not the thing. They are only a name that we have given to it. They are only a convention of humanity that we have somehow agreed to call this particular thing by this particular sound. What's fascinating to me, and Wendy started us off this morning, and she spoke to us in Spanish. She gave us the Spanish term for being well. Now, the concept of being well is a universal concept. And we go to different cultures and we go to different languages, and people have an audible sound to represent that concept. But the sound is not the concept. The sound is a representation of that concept. We have to come back even deeper and say, but the concept is not the thing. Our concept of a pipe is not a pipe. It is our concept of a pipe. So we can have illustrations, we can have stories, we can have parables. And teachers of all times have had to use parables to take something that is new and relate it to something that people can understand, that they already understand. It's like this. They have a simile. It's like that. It is this. It's a metaphor. So what we tend to be doing is we're trying to take that which is perhaps intangible and find a way to make it somewhat tangible. Even though it's still not tangible, we're a little bit closer. We're a little bit closer. And you've heard me use the example of the the handle with the suction cups on the end. You've seen these, if you've seen glaziers carrying a big pane of glass down the street. They've got a big handle and it's got a suction cup on each end, and they put the suction cups on the glass and they tighten down the suction cup. And now they've got a hold on something that they otherwise could not grab a hold of. Now, mind you, it's only temporary. It's only a temporary hold. It's only an aid. It only helps them get the glass off of the truck and, excuse me, into the storefront, for example. It doesn't stay there forever. At some point, the handle is no longer useful. At some point, the handle is no longer necessary. So these ideas that we have, these ideas that we toss around, these ideas about what is God, who am I in relationship to whatever this thing called God is, we have to keep in mind that those are just ideas. Those are just temporary handles, right? Like the handle with the suction cups. They help us get a grasp for a little while on that which otherwise we could not get a hold of. But they're only temporary at best. They're only temporary at best. So I kind of put that out because that's what we're doing over and over and over every Sunday of the year, every year that we've been doing this. What we're trying to do is we're trying to find a way to take that which is ineffable in itself, that which is beyond words, as the Hindus would say, that which is beyond words, but from which words come, that which is beyond thoughts, but from which thoughts come. Or as the mystic Rumi said, the field beyond the ideas of right doing and wrongdoing. I'll meet you there. What we have to come to grips with is that whatever this thing called the divine is, by whatever name we choose to call it, we can call it God, we can call it love, we can call it nature, we can call it spirit. It's called by many different things, by many different cultures, That whatever it is beyond the words, because the words are only a symbol of a concept. And the concept is only a mental image, a mental construct of something that goes beyond the capability of the human consciousness at this time to grasp. We can't grasp it. It's impossible. Joseph Campbell tells us that the word God is a metaphor for that which transcends every limitation of human consciousness. Every limitation of human consciousness. It has no beginning, it has no end, it's all powerful, it's all knowing. So there's no limits to what it can do, there's no limits to what it can know. There's no limits in terms of birth and death. It just is. It just is. See? And the human mind kind of, we look at that and we nod knowingly. Yeah, sure, I understand that. Kind of like me in calculus. Yeah, sure, I understand that. Didn't have a clue. So that's kind of just sort of a setup to where we're going today, what we're trying to get to today, and actually what we're trying to get to in some way, shape, or form every week. The words can kind of get us moving in a direction, but at some point, that which is beyond words has to go there. That which is before words has to go there. We have to have the experience. Or without the experience, we don't know. We don't know. Intellectually, we know, for example, there's this thing called chocolate cake. We read about chocolate cake. We see pictures of chocolate cake. We go to YouTube and there's videos of people eating chocolate cake. We can look up a recipe on the internet and we can see all of the ingredients that go into chocolate cake. We may say, oh, sugar, I understand what sugar is. We could say, oh, eggs. Yeah, I know what eggs are. Well, flour, yes, I know what flour is. But if you've never had a piece of chocolate cake, knowing everything there is to know about chocolate cake is not chocolate cake. It is not chocolate cake. It is not until you have the experience of chocolate cake that you know what you know your personal experience of what that is. And then the question must come up, well, is my experience the same as everybody else's experience? You see? Beyond words, beyond thought. So today what we want to do is we want to take a brief look at Dr. Holmes' teaching 3 chapters of the 1936 textbook called Spirit, Soul, and Body. And I think it's very important that we visit these 3 concepts periodically so that each one of us can stop and say, but what does that mean to me? You know, not what does it mean to Jim, what did it mean to Ernest Holmes? What does that mean to me? Has my mental concept of that changed? The words might be the same, spirit, soul, body, they may be the same. But my understanding of those 3 things may be entirely different than they were a year ago. Remember, we talked last week about consciousness unfolding, constantly unfolding. The universe is constantly expanding, and you and I are part of it. And consciousness is constantly unfolding. We are constantly discovering more and more and more of what God is and what we are as part of that, which is ever expanding. So there's actually 2 versions of the Science of Mind textbook, 2 popular versions of it. Excuse me. The first one was written in 1926. Now, I think the first book that Dr. Holmes, Ernest Holmes, wrote was in 1919. I think it's called Creative Mind and Spirit. And it is available in PDF format. Some of these things are so old now that the copyrights have expired. And people have scanned them in and put them out on the internet into the public domain, like Project Gutenberg, things like that. But if you look for them, you'll find them. And then in 1926, Dr. Holmes put together the first version of what became the Science of Mind textbook. Now that version of the textbook is also available on the internet in PDF format in the public domain. And that version of the textbook was a series of metaphysical lessons, and they were all about these 3 concepts: spirit, soul, and body. Spirit, soul, and body. And in the back of the book, he had what he called a series of metaphysical charts, and they also exist in the current version, the 1936 version of text. And you've heard me talk about them before. You think of a circle, and the circle has 2 horizontal lines across it that separates the circle equally into thirds, top, middle, and a bottom third. And the top corresponds to spirit, the middle corresponds to soul, and the bottom corresponds to body. And he kept referring back to those charts throughout the whole textbook. Everything that he wrote, he kind of pointed back to that. And I think he felt it was very important that the student metaphysician, the student, needed to really have a good grasp on at least what Dr. Holmes meant by spirit, soul, and body, so that then the student could develop their own understanding of what that is. But that is the essence. And he says that again in the 1936 book. So I'll just mention briefly. So what happened was in 1936, the contents of the book was reworked with an editor. And some of the things kind of got rearranged and they got changed. So that the metaphysical charts are still in the book, but the book is not so much, the 1936 version of the book is not so much a series of lessons about those charts. So I actually prefer the 1926 version. And if you can find a copy of it on the internet, it's well worth your time. It's well worth your time to read it. And Dr. Holmes may use these words in a different manner than we have grown up hearing, or a different way than we have grown up understanding them. So it's important that we at least go back and understand what he's trying to tell us, what he means by this, so then as we read the rest of his writings, right, we can go in and say, oh, okay, I understand that. Maybe that's different than what I was taught as a child growing up. Maybe the word is used in a slightly different way, but at least I understand what it is that he's trying to point us to. So he starts out with this explanation of spirit. Well, what is spirit? What do we mean by spirit? And he gives us the classic definition. He says the classic definition of spirit is consciousness without form. Consciousness without form. And I think we can kind of look at our culture and look at the things that we learned growing up. We say, oh, spirit. We think of disembodied spirits, you know. We think of ghosts. We think of people who have passed away, and all of these kind of things. and we have this concept then that there is this consciousness, awareness, beingness, if we want to call it that, suchness, isness, I amness. That there is this awareness that is not dependent upon form, that precedes form, that which is before the form, but from which the form comes. It is there, right? In our culture, if you go back and look at the book of Genesis, which is very well read in our culture, the story of Adam and Eve and those sorts of things, we're told in the beginning there was nothing. In the beginning there was chaos. In the beginning there was void. And then spirit moved upon the water. Spirit moved upon the consciousness. Spirit moved. There was a movement within the spirit itself. There was a movement within that which knows itself, knows that it is, knows that it knows. But that knowingness, that self-knowingness and those things is not an outpicturing of the physical. I often tell our classes that there's really only one fundamental question that all religions and all theologies and all science has to wrestle with. And that one question is consciousness caused by matter, or is matter caused by consciousness? And in this chapter of the book, what Dr. Holmes tells us is that consciousness is not a result of evolution, but consciousness is the cause of evolution. Consciousness unfolding, consciousness expanding, consciousness moving forward. So in the creation myths of the different cultures of the world, creation itself is a conscious act of a creator, called by different names, right? Different concepts, different cultures. But the idea that there is this something that creates, it precedes its creation, it is before its creation, but it creates, and that is spirit. So in the different cultures, it may be explained in slightly different ways. But the idea is that there is a creator who created. We would say that this is spirit, and one of the characteristics then of spirit is that spirit is creative. It is creative. Now Dr. Holmes tells us in very simple terms, if spirit is all that there is, if spirit is what preceded everything, if spirit was not creative, then there would be nothing. There would be nothing. Because spirit would not have created anything. In biblical terms, we're told that whatever has been created, God created, and if God didn't create it, it doesn't exist. It's very important to remember that if God didn't create it, it doesn't exist. It's not real. It's not real. It has no power of its own. So we have then these qualities of spirit that he starts to define for us, he starts to tell us about. Excuse me. It must have will and volition. It has the ability to choose. It has the ability to decide. It has awareness. It has the ability to know, and it has self-consciousness. It has the ability to know that it is and that it knows. Pure consciousness. Pure consciousness. And in some of the Buddhist practices, our meditation is designed to help us to come back to experiencing pure consciousness. I think they call it the blue light meditation. Pure consciousness. Pure consciousness aware of itself. Now, as human beings, we might think, well, this is strange. How can there be this? How can there be consciousness without form? How can there be consciousness without body? How can that be? And like I say, that goes beyond anything that we know. It's ineffable to us. And yet every night we lay down and go to sleep, and we exist in a world that is a creation of consciousness. We call it a dream world. It is a creation of consciousness. We function just fine. We do quite well. We can travel anywhere we want. We can fly without a plane. We can live underwater if we want. So it's pure consciousness having an experience without the necessity of the form. Without the necessity of the form. So we have this circle, and the top part of the circle represents will and volition and decisiveness and awareness and knowing and all of these things that we would attribute to spirit. And the middle part of the circle is what he calls soul. S-O-U-L, soul. And he uses it differently there, excuse me, than our culture typically uses it. So we need to explain that. So typically in our culture, when we talk about soul, we're talking about spirit. We're talking about, well, the essence of what you and I are is soul. That is, we are spirit that is not dependent upon the body. That's typically the way that we use it. So sometimes we might say that I am a soul, and other times we might say that I have a soul. But in our culture, typically when we're talking about the soul, we are talking about the spiritual aspect of being, the spiritual aspect of being. Another way that we might put it is that this thing that our culture calls soul is where the spirit has become human. Where that part of spirit that knows itself as us has become human, has taken on a human form, a body. But Dr. Holmes is not using soul in that term, in that way. That's not what he means when in this diagram that I'm telling you about. That's not what he means at all. He uses it more in terms of what I think in traditional Christianity we might associate with the Holy Ghost, the doer of the word, the doer of the word. Excuse me. In science of mind we would call it mind, capital M-I-N-D, mind, or we would call it the law of mind. So the difference that we have here between spirit and between soul is that soul is a subjective power, whereas spirit is aware. Spirit chooses. Spirit has will. Spirit has volition. Spirit can decide. Soul is subjective in that it can only act according to the direction it has received. Again, we go back to the book of Genesis. So God said, let there be. Let there be light. Let there be planets. Let there be stars. Let there be animals. Let there be people. You can go back and you can look through the days of creation in the book of Genesis, and it all starts with, and God said, let there be. This is spirit declaring. This is spirit deciding. Excuse me. This is spirit saying there shall be. And then something happens. Something acts upon that declaration. Something takes that declaration, if best way to explain it, takes it as a command. And goes off and does whatever needs to be done to make it so. So we're all familiar with our computers. You know, we have our computers, and you sit down and you tell your computer, calculate the square root of a certain number. And it goes and it does whatever it needs to do according to the way it's been programmed, and it comes back and it delivers you the result. This is the square root of that particular number. Now, the computer just simply does what it was told to do. It executes a command. It doesn't sit there on its own and say, gee, I wonder what the square root of 2 is, you know. It just sits there and it waits until we tell it what to do. So it operates then as a blind force. It operates without will or volition of its own, but it operates with an intelligence in that it knows what to do in order to call the subroutines up, in order to process the information, in order to come back and generate the square root of whatever number you've asked it. So it has intelligence in that it knows how to do what it was told to do, but it doesn't have will or volition to say, no, I'm not going to do that. As finicky as your computer sometimes is, there's not a little intelligence in there going, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm on strike today. I refuse. If it's not working, it's due to a bug. Excuse me. Pollen is the pollen is very, very high down here today. So this thing that Dr. Holmes refers to as soul is probably better understood or explained as a blind force or a subjective force that executes the will, executes the desire, executes the command that Spirit gives to it. Spirit says, let there be. This thing that Dr. Holmes calls soul, the doer of the word, the law of mind, does whatever needs to be done and makes it so. I love the old the Star Trek with Patrick Stewart where he put his fingers out and says, make it so, number one. You think, get that in your head. Make it so, make it so. Spirit is telling the soul, the law of mind, the power, make it so, make it so. And then this this soul being intelligent in knowing how to do what it's been told to do, combines whatever needs to be combined, organizes whatever needs to be organized, and brings about the outpicturing, the result, the demonstration of what Spirit told it to do. What Spirit told it to do. So here we're going to stop again. We're going to go over to another example that Dr. Holmes gives us to try to make it a little bit clearer how this works. So you and I decide we're going to have a garden this year. We're going to have a vegetable garden this year. And we cooperate with the way vegetable gardens grow. You know, we go out and we prepare the soil, however we choose to prepare it, whether it be to till it or to mulch it with straw and hay or to do whatever is appropriate for our area. Maybe a raised bed garden, maybe a garden down on the ground, all these different things. But at some point we have to decide what it is that we're going to have, you know. So here's this creative medium, here's the soul of the earth, the soil. It is perfectly capable of producing, you know, tomatoes or cucumbers or carrots or the different things that we might want. But we have to decide. We have to make up our mind. We have to choose. We have to have will. We have to have volition. That is, that part of us that is spirit must decide. So now we go and we pick out a seed. We go down to the seed store and we pick out our seeds. and we go back and we put those seeds into the creative medium of the soil, the soul of the earth, if you want to call it that. And then something happens to it. Something happens. A process that maybe we can understand chemically, maybe we don't understand. We don't have to understand it in order for it to work. That's the beautiful part of it. We decided what we wanted. We cooperated with the way things grow. We put the seed in the soil, we covered it with dirt, we watered it a little bit. We did all of the things that we were told to do on the back of the seed packet. And there's an intelligence that operates, albeit at a chemical level, but there's an intelligence that operates. And there's something within the seed that knows when it's time to sprout. There's something within the soil that supports that. The seed puts roots down into the soil and somehow knows how to draw from the soil the perfect nutrients to grow. It puts a little sprout up that goes up above the ground, reaches for the sunlight so photosynthesis can start. So it can cooperate with the law of life and draw in sunlight and use that energy of the sunlight to convert things to food. There is in essence, there is a miracle taking place beneath the soil. There's something there that knows what to do. Now that creative medium of the soil doesn't argue with you. If you plant tomato seeds, it'll give you tomato plants. If you plant cucumbers, it will give you cucumbers. But it doesn't have the will or the volition to say, no, Jim, I'm not going to give you cucumbers because they give you gas. Instead, what I'm going to do is I am going to give you carrots. If I give it a cucumber seed, it gives me back a cucumber plant. It doesn't have the will or the volition to change what I told it to do. It has the intelligence to carry out my directive. By taking the seed and putting it in the soil, I'm saying, give me cucumbers. It has the intelligence to do that, but it does not have the free will to change what I told it to do. We have to keep that in mind. It only does what it's told to do. And then you get the plants, and the plants would be the body. The body. In the example of spirit, soul, and body, we decided that we would have cucumbers. We put cucumbers into the creative medium of the soul of the soil, if you want to call it that. And the body, we got back the demonstration, that we got back the physical outpicturing that was the equivalent of what we intended when we made our decision to have cucumbers. That is the body. That is the demonstration. So what Dr. Holmes asks us to consider, first of all, we have to recognize that there are no such divisions within God. Even the circle, we draw this circle and we say, oh, there's 3 parts in this circle and they represent 3 different aspects of God. Similar in a fashion to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Not quite. But then we have to realize that this circle with lines in it is kind of like the painting of the pipe. That's not God. The circle is not God. In fact, as the mystics tell us, God is the circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. See, there can be no part outside the circle. If God is all there is, there can't be a circle and God is in this circle and then there's nothing on the outside. That would be a physical impossibility. But what it is it is a tool that helps us to understand. The story of planting seeds in the garden is a tool that helps us to understand. If we look at the oceans of the world, they have many different names, but there's only one ocean. There's only one ocean. We are the ones who give it different names. We are the one who look at it, and if we're standing on the east coast of the United States, we say, oh, that's the Atlantic. If we're standing on the west coast of the United States, we say, oh, that's the Pacific, but it's only one ocean. The different names help us to understand it, help us to remember where we are, and those sorts of things, help us to navigate. So there's only one God. But in order to help us to understand it, how it works, it helps us to consider these three different aspects. So Dr. Holmes tells us then that the physical universe, as we see it, the stars, the heavens, the plants, the animals, these bodies that we have, all of these things, they are the body of God. They are the outpicturing of a desire that Spirit had, that Spirit put into the creative medium of the soul. And then it outpictured. And again, you go back to the creation myths of the world, you go back to the book of Genesis, it said, and God said, let there be plants and animals. And God said, let there be people. God said, let there be stars and planets. All are trying to tell us the same thing. It started with the will, the volition, the intention of Spirit. Something acted upon that. And then there was the actual physical expression, the outpicturing of what Spirit wanted. So some of the metaphysical charts, when you look at them in the back of the book, they have a V going down through the circle, right? So the V starts up in the top, it comes down through the middle, it goes to the very bottom, and then it comes back up. And if you've traveled the country, if you attend different religious science churches or centers for spiritual living, some of them actually have that symbol as their logo, and some of them have kind of made the V in the form of a bird. You'll see some of the churches have like a seagull, and the wings of the seagull make the V. And what that is showing us is that the intention of Spirit comes down, it is acted upon through the creative medium of the soul. It then expresses or appears or outpictures in the physical form of the body. And Spirit then recognizes, Spirit then sees, Spirit then experiences the physical appearance of that which it had decreed. So we come back now then and we say, okay, well, one of the aspects of Spirit is that it's creative, and we know that there's a process by which this creation takes place, and that process, for our purpose of understanding, we have relegated to this middle section, circle, excuse me, that we call soul, and then there's the actual physical expression. And we would have to come back and say then, well, why is it that Spirit creates? And the only thing we can come up with, excuse me, I get another drink here, is that Spirit creates for the sheer joy of experiencing its creation, for the sheer joy of taking delight in what it has created. I do apologize for this cough. So now we come back to that and say, but what does that have to do with me? That's all wonderful, theoretical. What does that have to do with me? Well, Spirit wished to express itself in many unique ways. That was his intention. Placed into the law of mind, into the soul of the universe, into the doer of the word. And here we are. And because we have been created of the same stuff and substance, because we have been created in its image and likeness, this same creative process is at work in our lives all of the time. So what we're saying then is this law, the soul, this creative medium in the middle is the power that does it to us according to our belief, that our belief is the intention, the desire in the top part, and the circumstances of our lives are the bottom third, the body. Now we have to keep in mind that this thing that we're talking about, this belief, it's not necessarily a belief that we're consciously aware of. There are beliefs that function below our level of consciousness, but it is the sum total of what we believe. It's the sum total of what our intellect and ego believe. The sum total of what our consciousness believes. That is what is acted upon by the law. That is what outpictures in our life. Excuse me. And that's also very important because sometimes people look at something and say, well, I wasn't thinking anything that had to do with that. Of course not. Of course not. We're not sitting here thinking about that. But in our consciousness, right, because we are part of human consciousness, because we are part of race consciousness, we pick up beliefs. We believe things that we don't even know that we believed. Joel Goldsmith says it's like we're swimming in the muck of human collective consciousness, and we can't help but get some on us. And we should never, ever try to personalize evil. We should never say, oh my God, this calamity that has taken place in my life is an outpicturing of my thoughts. I brought this onto myself, yada, yada, yada. Says, no, all we need to do is take a shower. All we need to do is take a shower. So here is probably one of the most important things to keep in mind. Whatever the mind can think, the mind can unthink. This is straight from Dr. Holmes in these chapters. Whatever the mind can think, the mind can unthink. So if you are having some conditions in your life that you don't want, that are not desirable, that you look at and you say, how in the world did these things come into my life? Don't waste time doing that. Don't waste time wondering about where did this idea come from. Right? Think of Joel Goldsmith when he's telling us, just go take a shower. Just go take a shower. Separate yourself from the race consciousness. Unthink whatever it was that has been thought. And the way that you unthink it is by thinking the opposite, by thinking the truth. So if it's illness, then you think about the truth that God has never been sick a day in its life. God is all there is. God has created me out of itself. It's impossible for God to be sick. There's nothing but spirit. There's nothing but God. Matter does not have the power to tell God what to do. All these kind of things, and we just remind ourselves of the truth. So another example we have is water, H2O. We have this chemical formula for H2O, but it takes different forms. We have steam, the equivalent of spirit. We have water, the equivalent of soul. And then we have ice, the physical, hardened stuff. But it's all the same stuff. It's just the same stuff expressing itself in different ways. So what we want to come to realize is that this stuff that we call matter is nothing but energy appearing solid. That's all it is. And it appears solid for a little while, and it goes back to energy, and so on. So we want to not give this stuff called matter any more power than it has, which is none other than what we give to it. So this is why we remind ourselves that God is the only power in the universe. Matter does not have the ability to make God sick. Okay? Things like that. This is how we unthink. This is how we unthink a thought. So where we have to go then, what we each have to do, and I invite you to do it this week, is get a copy of the textbook. If you can get a copy of the 1926 version of the textbook off the internet, please do so. If not, take out your copy of the 1936 version and go in the back and look at the metaphysical charts. And when you're reading them, instead of looking at them and thinking, well, that's all about God, what I invite you to do is look at them and say, that's all about me. That's all about me. Because there is part of me that has will and volition and chooses and decides. And there's part of me that acts as a law that does what needs to be done. And it does so not because of who I am, but because of what I am. I am part of this whole. And that's the way the whole works. That's the way the whole works. And then there is a physical experience in my life, which is an outpicturing of what the law of mind has produced based on what we put into it. Dr. Holmes tells us that there's only one main problem that we suffer from. The human race, that is. And that is the belief in separation. We believe that God is out there. Even though we talk about God being all presence, we think that God's out there and we're over here. We have to unthink that. We have to unthink that. We have to think that God can do anything that there is to do, but we can't, and we have to unthink that. We have to unthink that. We think that God is spirit, but we're not, but we have to unthink that. We have to unthink those thoughts. So I invite you this week, contemplate this concept of spirit, of soul, and of body. And recognize that that includes you. That there is a part of you that exists before thought, before words, before concepts. And try to experience that through your spiritual practice, through your meditation, through your time alone, through your time in nature. Be still and know. Be still and know. I think when we start to develop this handle, this handle, like the suction cup handle, this handle of this chart that helps us to think about it, then we can temporarily get a hold of that which is ineffable. And eventually the tools are no longer needed. We start to have the experience. We start to experience the oneness with the presence and the activity of God. And that is what it is all about. And so it is.